Hi all, welcome to part 4 module 6 computer networks. So this is the in this video we'll be covering the TCP protocol. So far we see in the transport layer and its functionalities in general. Then we discussed one of the popular transport layer protocol, UDP, that is in the previous video. So now it's time for us to move on to the so-called transmission control protocol. So TCP was specifically designed to provide a reliable, so we will see how this reliability is achieved, end-to-end byte stream communication, right? So as we already know, the communication is between two processes, that is what is happening in reality, the sending process and the receiving process, and the transport layer is providing that end-to-end communication and its flow control, congestion control, everything in an end-to-end manner, and it's basically treating information as a byte stream that is coming from the sender process, which will be grouped into segments and is delivered to the receiver side. At the receiver side it will further given to the receiving process as another byte stream. So that is how the TCP will be treating the data. And such a reliable end-to-end byte stream communication is provided by TCP over an unreliable network. Why it is said so? Because if you look at the network, the network layer below it, it's unreliable because it's using the core protocol IP. IP is unreliable by default. So we will assume the protocol we are having is a TCP IP model. So that is why it is written like that. Now, TCP was designed to dynamically adapt to properties of the internetwork and to be robust in the face of many kinds of failure, right? So, we will see how the failures were handled in TCP, and it is capable of adapting with any types of internetwork. So that is the way the protocol is constructed, and if you want to know that protocol in detail, you can refer the RFC, the technical documentation, the request for comments. 793 is for the formal TCP documentation. You could see in RFC 793 is released in September 1981, but you know it's a very nice protocol, very important protocol, so it gone through many upgradations, right? Many features were added over time, so all those things we couldn't write inside a single RFC, so it gone through a number of different updations, and other RFCs are also there for specific features. So it's something like as time went on, many improvements have been made, and various errors and inconsistencies have been fixed in the TCP protocol. So accordingly we have a number of RFCs which will be discussing a specific feature of that so-called TCP protocol. So to give you a sense of the extent to TCP, the important RFCs are now, in addition to this 793, we have RFC 1122, RFC 1122, that is particularly for the clarification and bug fixes in the typical TCP, and another extension for high performance is added in RFC 1323. And selective acknowledgement is a concept that is being used in TCP, and its documentation you could find in RFC 2018. And the congestion control procedure, you could see the typical congestion control procedure used in TCP, you could see in RFC 2581. Repurposing of header fields for quality of service. We will see the initial header structure, and it's somewhat modified for supporting the QoS requirement of the network layer, and that you could see in RFC 2873. Improved retransmission timers you could see in 2988. This timer management is again another separate detailed topic. Explicit congestion notification we could see in 3168, right? The full connection is even larger, which lead to gate to the many RFCs published of sorry published of course as another RFC document called RFC 4614. Actually it will go like this, if you look at your syllabus, you could see that the second module is for data link layer, then third, fourth and fifth module we are discussing network layer in detail, and only half of the sixth module is given for TCP. So actually to cover TCP itself you can go like a subject. It's such a very vast topic, and for more and more details, if you are more interested, you can refer this RFCs and you will be getting a very good idea. But to cross reference these RFCs and to get means we have another RFC called 4614, where you will get it's a kind of umbrella where you will get information about all other RFCs regarding this TCP. So like that it is documented in a very vast manner, right? So that shows its importance and its specialities and all, but we will just have a glimpse on the protocol only. The minimum things we will be covering in your UG course, but maybe in the PG courses and all you will be getting to know more and more about TCP, or you can have your own reading also. So the TCP transport entity, right? Each machine supporting TCP has a TCP transport entity. Either it could be a library procedure or a user process, or most commonly is part of the kernel. So what are all the things to be done by the TCP? So that is written as a module in the TCP transport entity, and it is typically provided as part of the operating system kernel. So in all cases, it manages the TCP streams and interfaces to the IP layer. So whether it is as provided as a library or user process or as part of the kernel, particularly what these transport entities were doing, they were managing the TCP input stream and output stream, that is nothing but the byte stream, something we already seen, and also the interfaces to the layer below it, that is a IP layer. So a TCP entity accepts user data streams from the local process, like as a byte stream, the data will be accepted from the user process, the local process, and that will be broken further because it will come as a very lengthy byte stream, right? So it break them into pieces of size not exceeding 64 kilobyte. Can you tell me what is the 64 kilobyte? So typical size of an IP datagram. So when we discussed the size of IP datagram, the maximum size of IP datagram, right, we saw like it is 2 power 16 minus 1, right? So that is around 2 power 16, which is 2 power 6 into 2 power 10. So because you know that in that field we have 16-bit field, right? So with that you can have a maximum IP datagram size to be something like this, right? So which is approximately 2 power 6. 2 power 6 is 64 and 2 power 10 is kilo. So it's totally 2 power, so this many bytes, right? So it could be like that because it is given that segment to the IP network layer, which is having this IP protocol typically, and that time if it is something more than the 64 kilobyte, it is the network layer will further fragment it. We can avoid it, right, by correctly giving the value. So it can communicate with the network layer and can ask what is the maximum data you can support, and accordingly it can fix. You know, if it is the IP protocol being used, it is known to everyone, it's a well known number, it's a fixed number like 64 kilobyte as a maximum. But you know, when it comes to data link layer further, typically we are using Ethernet mostly in the data link layer, right? And that time the Ethernet is having a limitation that it can't handle the maximum transmission unit of Ethernet is found to be 1500 byte. It can't handle something more than that. So what is the problem? If you are giving this segment size to be 64 KB and it is given to the network layer, further the network layer is supposed to decompose it into 1500 byte to make it so that it can be transmitted over the network where it is connected, the particular local area network. So further difficulty will be there for the IP layer. So what the typical TCP? So all these are improvements actually. Initially people were thinking differently. They fixed with some value like 64 KB. Later they thought about the other cases also, like so they thought of minimizing the functionality of that IP layer. So let us make it simpler, something like that. So when we fix the problems at the very root level, it is very easy, right? So we don't have to make the lower layers worried out of it, right? So TCP will be communicating with the network layer as well as with the data link layer. So if you are using the IP protocol as a core protocol of network layer, and in data link layer if you are using the Ethernet standard, we know the maximum size limit of this IP, it is 64 KB, and for Ethernet it is 1500 byte only. So what is minimum of these two? 1500 byte, right? So if TCP is providing data with this size, it is very easy for the lower layers to handle them. Further fragmentation is not needed at all. If everybody is okay with the Ethernet protocol in the local area network. So further, why this 1460? That is actually this 1500 minus 40. Why we are subtracting so? Because with this 1460 at the network layer, so this is the payload part only. Right. So in addition to that, we will add IP header and TCP header. Minimum there will be a TCP header of 20 byte. We will see the header structure and size very soon. And also minimum there could be a 20 byte IP header, and together it make the 1500 byte information in the lower layer. So that is a typical size, right? So similarly here also this 64 kb minus 20, something like that, but this is a normal value. And we have further improvement in the transport layer, I mean particularly in the TCP protocol. So in the latest implementation of TCP, it is going to one more level beyond this. So what it will do is, so okay, this 1460 is good, but what is the guarantee that on the way all other local area networks were running that Ethernet and they were all supporting this value, then it is fine. But we have to ensure before starting our communication that on the way, if there is any network which can't support this 1460, means as a unit of data, like, or on the way, we suppose we have a network with a maximum transmission unit of 500 byte, we have to do that fragmentation further, maybe on the network layer or at the sending network, I mean maybe at the intermediate routers or at the sending side. Anyway, it will be done at the network layer. So can we avoid this fragmentation also? So the improvement is something like something I already discussed to you, that path maximum transmission unit using ICMP message, some special ICMP message. When I discussed ICMP and in IP also, I think I discussed it, same concept. You please recollect how it is working. So special ICMP message, you could find out what is the minimum minimum of all maximum transmission unit. Every network is having its own maximum transmission unit, and take them all such values on the particular path and find out the minimum. So that if you are sending the packet with that minimum size, on the way there could not be any fragmentation at all. So we could, so otherwise, even though you are passing, right, after some time you are forced to do that fragmentation. So if we can avoid everything at the transport layer itself, it's fine, right? So in that way things were proceeding, and more refinements were adding day by day. So when the datagram contained in the TCP data arrive at a machine, they are given to the TCP entity which reconstruct the original byte stream. So at the receiver side, again you may be getting the original data into different small segments of size, something like this. And now at the receiver side, they all has to be grouped and or reconstructed to the original byte stream, so that the application can read them just like the as a normal message without bothering about the message gone through some segmentation. And also in that way the receiver transport layer entity will behave. So proper algorithms will be running there for the reconstruction and all. The TCP must furnish good performance with the reliability that most applications want, and that IP does not provide. The good performance in the sense the IP can provide you only the best effort delivery, which is unreliable connectionless service. But TCP can ensure it if you are using TCP at the layer above the IP. But if you don't want that much higher performance, you can go with this lighter protocol, that is UDP. So let's see some of the features of the TCP, something we already seen only. The TCP provides a connection oriented reliable byte stream service. So everything is clear right now. So what is a connection oriented? So before starting the communication, the connection establishment will be there, and it's providing reliability, and of course the byte stream communication. The term connection oriented means the two applications using TCP must establish a TCP connection with each other before they can exchange data. So the terms were explained. So full duplex is providing you a full duplex communication. So it's by default TCP is a full duplex protocol, and the three modes and what is this in we already seen this. So meaning that each TCP connection supports a pair of byte stream, one flowing in each direction. So we are having communication in both directions simultaneously. So that facility is being provided by TCP. And TCP includes a very good flow control mechanism for which of these byte stream that allows a receiver to limit how much data the sender can transmit. So we will see the nice algorithm being used. If time allows, we will cover. Otherwise, you can read from the textbook how this TCP flow control is working. So something flow control mechanism we covered in detail in the data link layer. The similar concept only, but slightly modified as per the requirement of TCP. Actually, if you look at TCP, it's providing the flow control and congestion control together by a single algorithm. Right. So congestion control is actually dealing with the network traffic, right? So on the way, what is the maximum capacity of the network, whether you are sending something more than that, where flow control is dealing with the receiver's capacity, whether the receiver is able to take the data as you are sending, whether the receiver is with the same speed as you or not. So whether it is the receiver side or the network part, together it will see what is the capacity of both, and accordingly the sender will be nice, means with sender will add some effort, and it will find out what is the maximum capacity of the network as well as what about the receiver side, and accordingly the sender will send the data, so that there is no flow control. I mean the flow is under control as well as the congestion is under control. If there is any violation, accordingly and the basic procedure will be modified, and we will see. So we have a nice algorithm called additive increase multiplicative decrease algorithm for the flow control and congestion control together in TCP, with the very different phases like a slow start, AM. Okay, so maybe if time allows we will see this in detail. Otherwise you can also read. It's a very simple and nice algorithm. So the process to process communication is the very first functionality of TCP, right? It's particularly for the end to end communication or process to process communication. You could see that at the sender side we have the process say X, it's trying to get a connection with the receiver side process Y, and at the means this process is a concept that is used in the transport layer, means something like the application layer processes like that you can view them. And in the network layer we have the IP protocol, and transfer layer particularly we have the TCP protocol, and the IP is providing you the unreliable IP datagram service. This is similarly at the receiver side, and over this IP protocol we have the reliable TCP connection. And in TCP the addressing entity, means this port number is providing a way of addressing the TCP processes. So these processes will be identified by port numbers, right? Some unique. So we will see what is this port and all, and together this so the connection. So the socket is a kind of data structure that is used, that is having the connection parameters. So it will be having this sender's port number, receiver's port number, sender's IP, receiver's IP, together is going to identify a socket, and all the connection parameters will be kept inside this data structure. So that is how the implementation is going on. Alright. So if you look at the logical connection part, the connection is particularly with the help of the sockets. There is two process communicating via the TCP socket. So it's something like an entry point to the TCP entity at the sender side and at the receiver side. So socket is like a data structure containing the connection information, right? So data structure, in the sense we have some connection information, they will be acting as the values of the data structure, and also we have a set of routines, right? So the data as well as the functions that we can run over the data together defines the data structure. So similarly here also socket, you could see in the minimum the socket will be identified by the connection information like port number, IP address, etc. And also with every socket API we have a set of procedures by which we will execute the TCP functionality. We will see them. So each side of a TCP connection has a socket which can be identified by the pair. So at the sender side we have the sending process socket, or the sender process will be having a socket or the data structure that deals with the sender side socket, and that will be identified by the sender's IP address and sender's port number. Similarly at the receiver side we have the similar socket concept identified by this receiver's IP address and port number. So two process communicating over the TCP form a logical connection that is uniquely identified by the two sockets involved. So the connection is now identified by two sockets. So something like the local IP address, local port number, that is the sender side, and the remote side, that is the receiver side, the receiver's IP address and the remote port number. So it is something like this, actually communication is happening between two processes residing in two hosts. I hope this idea is clear for you. And the machine will be identified by say host A and host B. The machine will be identified by an IP address of this A and IP address of this B, and below that we have the physical address also. So and the context, so right now we are not taking that MAC address also, otherwise things will be more complex. So the sender process, because within a machine there will be a number of process running, right? So this process will be having one port number, and this process will be having another port number. Similarly here this B is having one port number. So if you identify a connection, PB1 like that I wrote. So if you have a connection from here to here, right? Suppose you are going to identify the connection with this PA1 and PB1 alone. We have a difficulty because suppose there is a connection that is between this process and say the similar one like this. I will clarify this. So why this alone is not going to identify a connection? So that is my question. So the problem is something like this. For example, there will be another machine, say a third machine C, and this third machine. So let me clear it. Right. So this ink is spreading, so maybe yes. So this is one machine, right? And this is another machine. This is a third machine. I'm just taking a scenario where this pair is, for example, so here I have a process. Let me give the port number P1. Here I have another process. Let me give the port number P2. And this connection C I am going to identify the connection with the number P1, P2. But the problem is, this port number is something unique within a machine only. So we have some 16-bit number as the port number, and 2 power 16 combinations were there. And those combination is something that is locally chosen, right? Of course, we have well-known ports, so that's a different story. Again, that well-known ports will be used by more than one process running in more than one machines also. And that time, so if you look at this is machine A and this is machine B and this is machine C. In the machine C may also give the maybe randomly assigning, but still there is no guarantee that the same P1 may be given to this process also. And in that case, he say this is Gmail server. Say B is a Gmail server, and through P1 host A is trying to get a connection with the Gmail server, and through C. And this host C is also trying to get a connection with the same email server. Both may be handled by the same process. If that is the case, this will also be identified by P1, P2. So how you will distinguish whether this connection or this connection is having this pair? So that is why we are adding this IP address also, like say IP1. Let me call it as IP2, and here it is IP3. So now the connection will be, instead of this, the connection will be identified by IP1 and port number 1. And also IP2 and port number 2. So when you are giving all these 4 parameters, so that will be a unique identification. In a similar way, you can think if you are providing IP1 and IP2 alone, can it uniquely identify each connection? Again, you could find out a counter example, something like this, where that will be repeating. So in general, we need all these 4 things to have that uniqueness for uniquely identifying any particular connection. So that about it. So that is why we are having it's not a pair, some 4 tuple is being used, like local IP address, local port number, that is the sender side, and the receiver side, the remote IP address and remote port number is together going to identify a particular connection, right? So that is actually the socket parameters. Now the socket is as a data structure. If you are viewing socket, along with this parameter, some set of operations were also defined in this socket interface, the socket application programming interface. So that is typically shown here, something again we discussed already in the transport layer part. So maybe if it is a Linux based system or Unix based system, it will be having its own socket interface being implemented, and Windows, I think they are having something called WinSock something, right? So WinSock API, and where they are providing all this functionality, maybe the name or the parameters slightly may be different. So this is something typically taken from, so something general only, depending on the operating system you can modify them. So minimal there could be a socket call, so that will create that particular data structure for you. So that will be happening at the sender side and also at the receiver side. The socket will be created out of this. Then once the at this sorry, here also that bind is there. So after creating the socket, it will be calling something called a bind. So with this bind, actually the socket will be bind to a particular that 4 tuple, and that port number, IP address together. So this particular socket will be bind to a particular port number, but actually port number alone is not sufficient to uniquely identify the socket. We need IP address also. So the binding process will first it will be binding that socket to a specific port number. So typically if you are looking at the server will be running some well-known application. It can be a web server or it can be a mail server. In that case, we, for almost all well-known application, for example web application, mostly they will use HTTP and they are having a well-known port number 80. Similarly, for a mail, if you are using simple mail transfer protocol, it will be having a port number 25. For the file transfer protocol, we have port number 20 and 21 for sending the data as well as the control information. Right, data, and 21 is for control. So like that we have many port number which are well known, so that is globally unique. So 25 always it will be for SMTP, something like that. So some first 1024 port numbers were given like this, and following them the remaining are handled in a different way. We will see. So anyways, at the server side, mostly to some well-known port number, the socket will be bind by calling the procedure called bind. Actually it's together the IP address that binding will happen. So then only the socket can be uniquely identified. Then the server will be executing something called a listen procedure, so by which it is listening for a connection request from the sender. So as soon as the connection is coming, the server is supposed to accept, and this accept is actually, or the accept which is implemented as part of listen, is actually a blocking call that blocks until the connection from the client arrives. So at the client side, after creating the socket, again it is to be bind maybe to a well-known port, but mostly at the server side only that well-known ports will be used, and client they will be using some temporary ports, right? From that range something will be given, and then it will be executing the connect request to the server. So as soon as the client is calling this particular system call, the connection on the background, right? So from the user side, the user will be just calling it as a system call, but it will trap the operating system kernel, and on background it will be sending the relevant messages for establishing the connection. And you will see the TCP connection establishment is a 3-way handshake procedure. So, I mean, after some 3 sets of communication, the connection establishment will happen. We may see how this 3-way handshake is happening if time allows. Otherwise, again, you can read by yourself. So that connection establishment will happen. So as soon as the connection request is coming, it will unblock and it will go for the establishment. So once the connection is established between the client and the server, or at the sender and the receiver, they can go for the actual data transfer. So the data transfer will happen in both directions, right? So when client want to write something into the server, it will be calling this write procedure, and what is being write into that communication path will be read at the server side, and it may request for something if it want to write something back to the client, say by write procedure, and it's read back. So that is a data request and data reply, and it will repeat as a loop, right? So any number of times that data transfer will happen, and at the end it will call that disconnect procedure or close procedure for end of file notification, and after reading that immediately the server will also close. So again this connection termination, the close procedure, so just like the TCP 3-way handshake connection establishment procedure, here it is a 4-way handshake procedure. Anyways, if time allows, we will see that also, right? Even that release of the connection should be done in a systematic phase. That about it. So all these procedures you could see in the particular socket interface or application program interface provided by that operating system. Typically, if it is Windows, we have WinSock API. For Linux, the normal socket API is there, and you will be seeing these procedures and their parameters, everything in your computer network lab, and that time you will get a very clear idea about how that connection establishment, data transfer, and release. Those things were happening in a typical TCP protocol. Yes, thanks for watching. Further details we will see in the next part.